Hello and welcome to this first lecture of new section on conducting a risk audit. So in this new section, we will learn about how to conduct a risk audit. In part of that, the first step in that is to identify and classify internal and external risks, and how can we do that is what we will take a look at in this lecture. So, identifying and classifying internal and external risk is a part of conducting a risk audit to do risk assessment and prevention, right? So that is to put in perspective, where does this lecture belong? So how to identify and classify internal and external risk? So before that, let's understand that to build a resilient crisis management plan, a plan that will stand up to the crises one after another as they happen. Your organization must first identify and classify risk. The risks are generally categorized as internal, that is originating within the company, or external, arising from outside factors, outside the company. How can you go about systematically assessing and classifying the risk? Let us take a look at that. So, first step is to identify potential risks. You need to identify all potential risks, right? And we just understood and earlier also there are two kinds, internal and external. So let's take a look at each and see how can we identify these potential risks. So the internal risks are the ones that are controllable risks, and these originate within the company and can often be mitigated through proper planning and internal control. Now, what are these different types of risks for you to understand and then build up on your own? So you can go by the categories. So in operation risks, there is a risk of equipment failure, supply chain disruptions, workforce shortages, and they have the impact in terms of downtime of production, loss of production, and service delays. The second kind of risk that you can look at in your organization is the financial risk. And financial risks can, result from flow issues, cash flow issues, right? Then they can come from economic downturns, investment, losses, etc., etc. And that can result in bankruptcy, which has a severe consequence, revenue decline, and the regulatory issues there, regulatory fines that can come there. The third category of internal is the reputational risk. These can arise from in the form of PR crises. These are some examples: unethical practices being done by the company people inside, and executive misconduct. So these could be some reputational risks that can happen, and they will result in loss of customer trust, stock prices drop, etc., etc. Similarly, there are risk on technology and cyber right side, like IT failures, uh, data, breaches, and insider thefts, etc. Then that can result in information loss and regulatory issues. Then there's compliance and legal risk that could come in the form of, violation of the security laws, industry laws, lawsuits, contract breaches, etc. And that results in hefty fines and operational restrictions. So these are some of the types and examples of internal risk and their impact. Then the second type of risks are the external risks, which are uncontrollable but manageable. And these come from outside the organization and require proactive monitoring and adaptation. Now, what are these kinds of risks? Now, this could be in the form of natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, wildfires, hurricanes, etc. There could be cybersecurity risks like, um, um, ransomware attacks, data hacking, etc. Then there are regulatory and legal changes that could result in external risk, and it could be in the form of new government policies, tax law changes, industry regulations. There could be economic or market risk in terms of inflation, then internal interest rate risk, market downturns, etc., etc. And each of will they have their potential impact that you can see here. Now, to determine this, the best technique to use is a SWOT analysis and industry benchmarking. You can get together in a room with your key people, key stakeholders and people, and do the SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And also compare your performance. Look at the industry, what industry is doing. Industry defined as suppliers, your customers, your competitors, substitutes, etc., as per Michael Porter. So that could be one way to identify these external risks. Once you have done the external risks identification, you need to classify risk based on severity and likelihood. Now, what is normally this is done in the form of likelihood being high, medium, low, and the impact also being high, medium, and low. So then once you classify, then that starts showing up how you can, manage that risk. If it's a risk that is high on impact and high on likelihood, then you need to mitigate it immediately. If it is a high impact risk with low likelihood of monitoring on the top left, you just need to monitor. If the likelihood is low and the impact is low, you can ignore it. So like this, based on the combination of the impact and likelihood of occurrence, you could take a strategy on how to handle that. And there, as we were saying, you basically prioritize high impact, high likelihood risk in your crisis management strategy. The third step would be to implement risk monitoring and response strategies. And there you can do four things. First is to use softwares like RiskWatch, Metric Stream, and Logic Gate to track risks in real time. Second would be to have an incident reporting system set up where you can encourage employees to report the internal risk before they escalate. The key thing is need to report the internal risk before they escalate. The third would be regulatory compliance teams that you can have to implement risk monitoring and response strategy, where you assign teams to monitor legal and policy changes affecting operations. And then there could be business continuity plans that we have talked about, where you develop contingency plans for critical risk categories. Remember to conduct quarterly risk reviews to ensure how threats are accounted for, right? So, what are the final takeaways? So there are four things that we would say here. First, you need to identify risk, internal risk and external risk. The internal risk are, as we saw, operational, financial, reputational, and external are natural, cyber, and regulatory kind of a risk. Then use a risk assessment matrix to classify risk by likelihood and impact. And third is to prioritize high impact, high likelihood risk for immediate mitigation. And then monitor risks continuously using reporting tools and industry insights. So those are the final takeaways from this lecture. So what do we do next? So having looked at how to identify and internal and external risk, identify and classify, we will now look at how to prioritize. We talk to them on prioritizing them on the basis of likelihood and impact. We will get into details of that in the next lecture. So thank you so much for watching this first lecture on conducting a risk audit in this course, Crisis Management in BCP. I hope you're continuing to learn new things, continuing to enjoy, and I do look forward to see you again in the next lecture. Please feel free to message me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and do download the PDF file to take a look at anything that you need.